When I opened the door, my cousin was asleep in his bed, and I never thought I'd walk in on him like that. His tool was out, and I was shocked. I couldn't help but do something I never would have imagined doing. What occurred next altered everything, and the July heat pressed down on what ended up being the most thrilling and unforgettable night of my life. Heavy and oppressive, and I was able to spend it at my mom's sister's place as usual every summer. My aunt welcomed me with her customary warmth as I got out of the car and tossed my bag over my shoulder, drawing me into a hug before guiding me inside the house, which had a familiar and reassuring scent of new laundry and light coffee. I was more focused on the notion that I would be spending the upcoming weeks in close proximity to Noah than on that. I had previously spent the summer with my cousin, my straight cousin, but this time something felt different. Perhaps I was the only one. But the idea of spending weeks in his company made my chest feel constricted. Noah had always been a self-assured individual who never doubted himself, and his pulse was a bit too fast. He was always certain of his position in the world and had an arrogant smile that immediately won people over. Maid ladies, and if I was being completely honest, I found myself drawn to him because I had discovered I buried my feelings for him long ago, pushing them deep into a place where I wouldn't have to face them, yet I could already feel those feelings brewing beneath the surface as I stood in his house once more. Jake Guy. Noah's words abruptly interrupted my thoughts as he leaned casually against the doorway of the wearing only basketball shorts and his toned chest. He had a smile on his face in the living room. Glistening a little from the heat, I said, trying not to look like I was stuck in traffic. I excused myself by dropping my luggage close to the couch while maintaining my voice, taunted me by coming forward and giving me a violent one-arm embrace before pushing me. I rolled my eyes at you because you're still thin or you've finally put on some muscle. Eyes I work out. Noah sneered. Yeah, certainly. I retaliated, and he said, I bet you still lose every fight maybe because you cheat. Aunt Linda entered with a water bottle for Noah and chuckled, making me feel a strange flutter in my chest. Jake, your room is the same as usual, Noah. Be kind to your cousin, who reprimanded you despite her tone being amused. Noah saluted her lazily, saying, Don't keep him up all night with your nonsense. I snorted as she pretended that I was the troublemaker before turning back to face me. Since you are the only one there, I'm getting my suitcase and going to the guest room. Smiled as he walked behind me, filling the tiny hallway with his presence. The following days settled into a routine of swimming outside during rhythm, hanging together and playing basketball while evenings were spent playing computer games and having languid discussions. As usual, it was easy and pleasant. However, there were a few minutes that caused my stomach to turn and my breathing to catch like Noah's, stretching his muscles after working out and showing off his tanned skin in the manner he'd. When he chuckled at something foolish I said, he put an arm around my shoulders and pulled me in close, just like our legs would. One night, neither of us moved away from the couch when we were sitting uncomfortably near to it. We ended up sprawled out in his room after yet another exhausting day of doing nothing. Noah had fallen into his bed while the TV's illumination created gentle shadows on the walls. I sat on the floor and leaned back against his face with one arm thrown over it. Even though I wasn't paying attention, the dresser was watching the TV. Have you ever considered it, Noah? The silence was abruptly broken by a voice, and I scowled as I looked at him. I could hear the smirk in his voice even though he didn't move his arm. My body tightened while doing something with a guy, and my heart slammed into my ribs, so I tried to appear casual by forcing a laugh, but I was certain he could hear it. Noah finally moved his arm and looked at me, but where in the world did that come from? That recognizable, slack assurance, as if he weren't asking a question that had just completely upended my existence. He stretched his arms behind his head while asking a question, which caused his abs to tighten. I don't know, it's not something I'd ever do, but I understand why some guys are like it, so I really didn't need to notice. I bet it's different, correct? I forcefully swallowed, averting my eyes from my. His words seemed insignificant, as if he weren't sitting there tossing a grenade, but my mouth was dry and my mind was spinning. I suppose I whispered into my already brittle self-control, keeping my tone calm, and Noah gave a low, I managed a smirk. Imagine if people found out they'd lose their finally turning to, face him. Yeah, they would, he said, smiling as he shifted on the bed. I didn't know if he was being playful or actually interested, and I couldn't afford to find out. So I simply shrugged and didn't really hear Noah hum, who seemed content with my response and returned his focus to the TV, although I was having a lot of thoughts. He didn't realize what he was doing to me when we collided at such a dizzying speed, or perhaps he did. But in any case, the story didn't stop there. I could never have predicted what would happen next, and when I woke up the following morning, I was still sleepy. My head was still whirling from what Noah had said the previous evening, and I kept thinking about it, attempting to determine whether his statement was a random notion or if there was more to it. But I convinced myself that there was nothing more to worry about than the fact that he was straight. I forced myself to get out of bed, put on a t-shirt, and went to the Aunt Linda had already departed for work in the kitchen, and Noah was not present. I was half asleep when I got a bowl of cereal because the house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Footsteps behind me. "Damn, you look dead," remarked Noah as he entered shirtless and began to touch. I almost choked on my cereal because his eyes and hair were messier than usual. "Heard of a shirt?" He smiled, lifting his muscles above his head. "I'm not sure how you sleep with a shirt on, but I tried to flex because it's too hot, man. Disregard my tense stomach and concentrate on my cereal, which not everyone wants." Noah shrugged and grabbed an energy drink from the refrigerator before leaning against the last night. As the counter watched me, I tensed the spoon that was hovering over my bowl. "What about it?" He grinned. "Calm down. I'm not saying anything strange." "Was it strange?" I asked, forcing a nonchalant shrug while maintaining a neutral appearance. "Nah, just random." Noah sipped his drink while continuing to stare at me as if he were examining my reaction. "You're sure? Because you became silent when I forced a falsehood, because I was simply exhausted." Noah nodded slowly as I moved to meet his gaze, his smirk turning into an unreadable expression. "Okay, if you say so," I exhaled, but he pushed off the counter. As he left, I realized I was holding, but my comfort was fleeting since he turned around a second later. "I hope you're prepared because several of the men are coming around later." I scowled at Noah's small, playful smile because I didn't like the way he said it. But I didn't have time to argue before he disappeared into his room. Later that afternoon, his friends showed up. I had met most of them previously. Evain, Dylan, Marcus, all part of Noah's normal crowd. They were all loud, cocky, and exactly the kind of men Noah fit in with. We spent the day outside, joking around, playing hoops, jumping in the pool when the heat grew excessive. It was fun. However, every now and then I'd catch Noah looking me in a manner that felt my skin prickle, like he was testing me, like he really being waiting for something. Then, shortly after midnight, when the men were sitting about drinking, laughing over some story Marcus was telling Noah, moved over to me close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath against mine. I glanced to him and raised an eyebrow. "If you ever played Truth or Dare." "What sort of question is that, eyebrow?" He grinned nicely because we're playing, and just like that when the game began, it was the typical dumb prank of drinking and dares. Calling ex-partners when they're running around the backyard in boxers. Nothing serious exciting. But as the game continued, the tension began to increase. When it was my turn, Even smiled at me and appeared to be up to no good. "Or dare, Jake." I paused. The truth felt too dangerous, and Noah grinned. I narrowed my eyes and leaned back comfortably on the couch. "Come on, man, don't be a coward." Ivan's smile grew as I looked at him, my competitive side kicking in. "Yes, the atmosphere in this place altered the boys, and I dare you to kiss someone." My pulse pounded in my chest as they burst out laughing and nudged one another as though it were the greatest thing they had ever heard. Oh, Marcus, this just got interesting. I can hear the sound hammering in my ears. Dylan shook his head and smiled. Damn, Yvonne, after taking a sip of his beer. Yvonne only chuckled when I said, "It's a classic dare, but you really went for it," forced a smirk while swallowing hard, despite my head racing. Yeah, well, too. Unfortunately, the fun thing is that there are no girls here. Noah said in a funny tone that he was. His lips twisted in that same playful smirk as he looked at me, his head tilted slightly. Marcus shrugged. "You're all straight," adding, "I could feel my palms sweating all the time." Ivan put his hands together in a daring that doesn't have any significance. It was just a stupid game, and I was trapped backing out because my throat was dry. To make matters worse, Noah leaned forward with his elbows, which caused my breath to catch. I couldn't read the look he gave me while on his knees. But come on, Jake. You're afraid. Something about the way he said it heated the air between us, making my heart race with each word. I was already in motion before I could stop myself or think. Leaned in to close the gap between us, squeezing his gut, beating his heart, and then our lips touched. It was only a faint push of my lips, not quite a kiss. Against his, but the moment it occurred, it seemed as though the world had stopped the man. Eyeballs burst into yells and laughter, but I could hardly hear them since Noah remained motionless for a brief moment. Didn't Flinch seem horrified or shove me? He simply remained there, staring at me as something flickered in. As quickly as it happened, Noah's expression made my stomach turn. Smiled and shook his head, saying, "Damn, Jake didn't know you'd really do it." Despite my head spinning, I forced a laugh because you dared me. Dylan grinned and even whistled, shaking his head in an unexpected way. You looked like Noah rolled his eyes and scoffed, which you almost liked. Quit being a fool. However, the way he glanced at me after a little moment when no one else was around made my chest constrict. Continued, but I wasn't truly there because my thoughts were fixed on the Noah's eyes, had lingered a bit too long, and I wasn't sure why he didn't go away. Meaning, but I had a feeling that the game would become much more complex this summer, and it finally fizzled out. I laughed as the guys continued to discuss football and a party that would be held the following weekend. Jokes, nodding when I should have, but my thoughts were still focused on what had just occurred. But it was only a brushstroke and a foolish dare, not even a true kiss. I told myself repeatedly that was what it was meant to be, but why I kept thinking about how Noah stared at me immediately after, and I wondered why he didn't draw away. Instantly, and why did I think that for a brief moment he wasn't fully I attempted to shake it off, but Noah had always been straight. Would be that kiss didn't mean anything to him, and I had to remember that. I told myself to forget about it before I started seeing things that weren't there, but I couldn't. With Noah seated just next me, his arm behind the couch, fingers touching my shoulder, I could feel As he bent to sip his drink, he removed heat from his flesh from his knee, brushed across mine, and although it was most likely an accident, my entire body tightened, and I had to get up and stretch because I needed air. Evan nodded. "Yeah, man," as if I were simply exhausted and thought I may crash after a hard day. The boys all complained about having to go, but we should probably go too. They gathered their belongings, said their goodbyes, and Noah went away without arguing. Dylan muttered something that made everyone laugh, so I took advantage of the moment to flee to my room and close the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my seat and exhaled like if I had been holding my breath for hours. Bed, stroking my hair, and told myself to stop being strange, was only a game and had no significance. A little while later, I heard the front door closed, and Noah's footsteps and voice were closer than mine. I looked up as my bedroom door pushed open, and Noah was there. "I expected you well." With one hand on the doorframe, he stood there looking at me as if he could read my thoughts. I forced a laugh. "Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?" He entered and closed the door. I'm not sure why you ran out of there so quickly behind him, but it felt strange. Just exhausted, Noah shrugged and approached my bed without seeming convinced. You're certain it's not about the kiss, because he was perched on the edge, as if he had every right to be there. Noah smirked and rested his elbow on his knee as I froze. Are you going to act like that? Didn't happen. My throat became dry. It was a dare, and Noah nodded. However, you did it really quickly without hesitation, and I sneered while attempting to act like you guys would have considered me a coward, Noah, if I hadn't been seconds away from exploding. Arched an eyebrow, but instead of arguing, he simply nodded while maintaining eye contact. He astonished me once more as if he hadn't finished playing with my mind. When I looked at him, I didn't anticipate the inquiry. Have you ever kissed a guy before? Noah grinned, as if he understood exactly what he was doing to me. I swallowed hard to respond. Why do you care if it's too personal? I shrugged, just wondering since I was at a loss for words and my heart was pounding too quickly. Noah leaned back on his hands as I clenched them at the blankets, as if they could somehow keep me anchored. Exhaling with my elbows wasn't as strange as I had anticipated. I blinked at his nonchalant kiss, like if we were discussing the weather. Believed it to be disgusting or something, but it wasn't. It was merely I couldn't believe what I was hearing from Noah, and my heart was racing. Sitting on my lap was the cousin I had tried for years to deny my feelings for. Bet assuring me that it wasn't strange for him to kiss me. I must have been dreaming. Observed that I was gazing because he shook his head and laughed. Calm down, man. I didn't even know why I forced a laugh, not that I enjoyed it or anything, but it hurt more than it should have. Noah was clearly stretching and yawning, but don't worry too much about it. It was only a game. Game. I nodded, despite my head screaming at the moment, like though he hadn't just Noah nonchalantly dropped a bomb on me, got to his feet, stretched once more, and pulled his top up. Just before he turned to face Night Jake at the entrance, he walked, leaving me sitting there with my head whirling, heart thumping, and my mind utterly unable to comprehend what just I realized I should let it go, as I lay back on my bed and stared at the ceiling. However, something about Noah's statement that it wasn't strange kept coming back to me, as if he was attempting to make himself believe anything as well, and for the first time since he moved in, I began to question whether I was the only one experiencing this, and I was correct. What transpired next left me speechless, and when I woke up the following morning, I felt as like my mind had been racing my dreams during my sleep. Marathon had been a jumble of nighttime flashbacks and memories. Noah sat so idly on my bed before he smirked and said that none of I moaned and rubbed my head, but it was a major thing, at least to me. My face before making myself get out of bed since I didn't want to linger about something that most likely meant nothing. Noah had admitted to being straight, and that he didn't enjoy the kiss. Been playing it off and mocking me to make sure we weren't awkward, but if that were the case, why I pushed those thoughts away since I couldn't get rid of the way he had stared at me. I put on some clothing and headed to the kitchen. The house was silent, and for a moment I believed Noah could have already left, but as soon as I heard the sound of the shower starting, I naturally rolled over. I tried not to think about Noah when I stared at myself in that dripping steam. Getting up from his body, I saw I had to stop and grabbed a glass of water and spent a few minutes at the table looking through my phone in an attempt to concentrate on something else. Later, I heard Noah's footsteps padding down the hallway as the bathroom door creaked open, and I saw him wrapped in a towel. Low on his hips, his hair damp, water droplets still sticking to his skin, and I almost choked on my water. But Noah didn't use a towel, and it was sloppy like he had just passed a hand through it. He entered the kitchen as if he owned it, stretching his arms above his head as if he could sense my reaction. Flexing his abs in a way that felt almost criminal, he murmured, snatching after taking the protein shake out of the refrigerator and unscrewing the cap, I nodded and went to sleep, putting down my glass before I dropped it. And yes, you, Noah, grinned while I narrowed my eyes at him and took a sip of his drink. No strange nightmares or anything. He leaned against the counter as if nothing had happened, and I wondered if that was a jab at me. I needed him to essentially acknowledge that our kiss last night wasn't as strange as he had anticipated. I got up and grabbed my phone to leave. "I'm going for a run, Noah." I needed an excuse, so I raised an eyebrow. "When do you run in the morning?" I shrugged and stopped glancing at you because it seemed right. Noah laughed and shook his head. "Okay, man. Go ahead and give it your all." I wasted no time in making my way to the door in an attempt to get my thoughts straight, but before I could go outside, Noah yelled out to me, "Hey, Jake!" So I turned to. He grinned as he allowed my gaze fall to where his towel was just about hanging onto his hips. "You sure you're not fleeing from something?" I snorted a joke and snubbed him as I left, but the reality. Yes, I was jogging because I wasn't sure what I would do otherwise. I tried my best to stay away from Noah for the remainder of the day, but I wasn't particularly successful. Utterly pitiful, but I kept myself occupied by making sure there was always something to do and somewhere to go. I felt a little better as the sun began to set, as if I had finally forced the previous night to the back of my mind. That was before Noah knocked on my door, saying, leaning against, I looked out where he shrugged and said, "The frame wants to go out tonight." It may be enjoyable to have people over, but I was hesitant because the last thing I needed was Noah was staring at me as if he expected me to say yes, but for some reason it was just another night of drinking and foolish dares. I murmured, "Yes," since I couldn't force myself to say no. Noah smiled. "Okay, let's leave." By the time we arrived at Evan's house, the celebration had already begun. People were packed in the living room, kitchen, and even outside as the music roared from the speakers. I tried to unwind on the back patio by getting a drink, but it was difficult since he had always been that self-assured, charming everyone and making it seem so natural. Laid-back guy who never seemed to question himself, and that was precisely why something changed after I tried for years to avoid falling in love with him. I was just beginning to relax after my second drink when I looked around and saw Noah already staring at. Instead of merely observing, I forcefully gulped what he smirked and shook his head at. Nothing, but I could sense it by the way his eyes lingered He lingered close to me for a bit too long, as if he wanted to make sure I didn't stray too far. Perhaps it was the booze, or perhaps it was because I was sick of acting as though he had no effect on me, but I chose to put him to the test and turned. I leaned a little closer than required to the girl next to me, a brunette I hardly knew, and she laughed, as she angled her body towards mine as I spoke, touching my arm, and that was Noah's jaw tightened when I saw it. But he remained silent and didn't cause a commotion. However, I could tell he was jealous because of the way his hand tightened over his drink and his smile dimmed a little. Gave me a shock, and before I could stop myself, I pushed it even more and leaned in for a little more. All it took was for the female to laugh and put her hand on my chest. Noah moved forward and took my wrist, being strong but not forceful. "Hey," he said. "Voice low? May I speak to you for a moment?" I raised Jake's grip tightened just a little bit, and I'm kind of busy, Jake. My pulse jumped when he said my name, and I looked at the female who was providing a quickly return before allowing Noah to yank me out of the mob. He didn't stop until we were outside. He dropped my wrist as we were jogging, the cool night air falling between us. I folded my arms and put my hand through his hair, as if he was trying to calm himself. "What's the matter, Noah?" I smirked as he gave me a stern look. "Are you trying to annoy me? Why are you acting jealous?" Noah shook his head and scoffed, but he didn't deny it. "Like a fool, you're pretending as though you cared when I moved closer." Noah clenched his jaw, but he didn't. He straightened his shoulders and stood his ground, seemingly daring me to push him more, so I took a step back. Did I turn my head and slightly lower my voice? What's wrong, Noah? You don't like seeing me with someone else. He let out a loud breath and flexed his fingers at. The tension between us was so great that neither of us moved for a moment. Noticeable static crackling, and Noah's voice became quieter than before. If you're curious about what I dislike. I swallowed, and my throat became abruptly dry. I could feel the warmth of Noah's body as he moved closer. His eyes darted to my lips, his breath evaporating on my skin, and in that, as soon as I realized that this was more than just a game, something significant was going to occur. The ride home from the party was silent, and what transpired next permanently altered us. Both Noah and I remained silent, but there was a new dynamic between us. Something heavy and intense, like the quiet before a storm, and I kept glancing at him, observing how his jaw was. His fingers were clenched and gripping the wheel too tightly. He hadn't given me a glance since we got in the car, and I was unable to determine whether he was feeling furious, perplexed, or something else. When we eventually pulled into the Noah turned off the engine in the driveway and sat there for a moment, looking straight ahead. I waited for him to say anything, something, but he simply let out a breath, combed his hair, and exited the vehicle without saying anything. If he wanted to act strange, that was his issue. I followed him and closed the door after him. As he vanished down the hallway towards his room, I paused to consider if I should simply go to bed or if I ought to press him to discuss whatever was bothering him. But before I could make up my mind, I heard his bedroom door click close, so I let out a sigh and ran a hand down my face before going to my own room. But I had trouble falling asleep because my thoughts kept reliving the entire evening, including every touch, gaze, and moment that Noah was too close without retreating in the manner that the way he had dragged me away from that girl, had caused his gaze to dart down to my lips. Noah had always been straight, but it didn't make sense that he couldn't bear to see me with her. I tossed and turned for what seemed like hours, but finally fatigue took over. So why was he acting this way? I'm not sure how long I was asleep when I woke up, but my eyelids got heavy and this actually happened. But it was so incredible that I abruptly turned him around and we did something that I can't describe in detail, but it seemed like we were investigating something that we had both desired. For an extended period, the room felt blurred by the tremendous yearning that had overtaken me. Ragged gasps, the way our bodies tangled, the smaller, hotter silence that was only broken by the sound of our breathing. There was nothing else there, and they were all together in a jumble of bewilderment and yearning. Then, after everything had occurred, it ended as abruptly as it had begun. In the dimly lit room, we laid with our bodies intertwined and our hearts still pounding. Noah lay there with his chest rising. While falling, his eyes widened and his complexion reddened as if he couldn't believe what had just happened to my body. Was burning, and my mind was racing as I tried to make sense of it. The hush was caused by something that shouldn't have made sense, but did. Loud. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling a little as I pulled, my throat drying out. Noah was still staring at the screen when I forced myself to sit up and force myself to breathe. Sealing, his body tight, his expression opaque, I couldn't tell what he was. I was wondering if he was going to lose it, or if he was just as confused as I was. And then he finally said what his voice was hardly audible above a whisper, yet it was full of something. What the heck just happened? Noah let out a sharp exhale while running, but I was unable to identify him and I didn't know how to respond. He ran a trembling hand over his hair and exhaled a nearly breathless. His countenance stiffened as he laughed hysterically, as if he couldn't believe it. "We cannot do this." He shook his head and continued to avoid eye contact. This did not occur in my stomach. I was about to laugh, but I made myself nod. Yes, my voice was hollow, but it did. Noah grit his teeth and lift himself up, snatching his discarded shirt. After thrusting it over his head, he appeared devastated, as though everything had suddenly changed. Even though he didn't know who he was anymore, Noah moved to sit next to me without glancing at me. A soft yet powerful voice said, "I don't know what we're doing," breaking the silence. He rambled on, nearly lost in the silence between us, and I was hesitant to inquire. However, Noah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up and moved towards the window. His voice said, "I don't think I can stay here not like this," as I stared into the darkness. It was far away, like though he was already backing away, but it wasn't frigid or warm either. I had a panic attack as if something were slipping out of my grasp, but I had no idea what Noah was doing. "Please." He turned to look at me, his eyes piercing. "You must believe this is about us and what we might become, but I'm not sure." He looked down while running a hand through his hair. "I'm not who you believe me to be, and I'm not even sure who I am. We don't fit into the categories you want us to, and we never did, so I can't keep acting like this half the time." His remarks were like a slap, but I was unable to respond and chose to sit there instead. "Frozen? So what?" I questioned, my voice hardly audible, as Noah got to his feet but didn't approach the door. "I'm not sure," he stated in a low voice. "I'm not going because, even though I don't care about you, I'm leaving since it's also right. I nodded, felt my heart ache in slow motion, but I refrained from crying. "I need time." There was absolutely nothing to be upset about, and there was no definitive response to any. There was no tidy conclusion to this, and oddly enough, it seemed to be the most difficult aspect of all. I whispered, "After this, we'll be the same." Noah stopped at the entrance and held my hand on the knob, and for a moment, he appeared as though he might say something consoling or something else. But then, he simply shook his head and had sad eyes that I couldn't quite make out. He said in a barely audible voice, "But perhaps that's what I need to understand." And he left without saying anything else, leaving me alone in the empty room. The silence encircled me as I attempted to reconstruct something that had already broken, but I was unable to. Perhaps I wasn't intended to, and perhaps the true response was that there weren't any answers, at least not yet. Sometimes things simply happen, and you have to deal with the fallout. Regardless of how disorganized it may be, that was the last thing I considered before the door behind him snapped shut. I truly did what I was supposed to do, which was to be silent and promise nothing. Would like to know whether you've ever been in a similar circumstance, or if you can relate to what I'm saying. Feelings? Please leave a comment below. Your opinions are very important to me at the moment. I'm not sure how to interpret it all yet, but I suppose that's a necessary part of the journey.